Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. Um, we are waiting for our guest speaker, Andrew Miller. We'll just give him a few minutes, and then we'll start. And that'll give people time to join as well. Please go ahead, share and retweet the space so that more people can benefit from these spaces. The style of this space is where we have the speaker present for about 45 minutes where we ask him prepared questions. And then we allow for 15-20 minutes for the audience to ask questions. So we we'll start as soon as there he is. And until we get him up, I wanted to just introduce him a little bit. Andrew Miller is the CEO of ATM Holdings and has invested and advised on some of the highest value domain name transactions on record, including recent deals for Home.com, Candy.com, Universal.com, and he founded CreditCard.com and InsuranceQuotes.com. He had very successful exits, and he started investing in NFTs in 2021. And he has a Bored Ape. So we're very, very happy to have him here with us. I'm gonna invite you to speak, Andrew. And yeah, we'll start in a couple of minutes. Hi, James.
Hey guys, super excited to be here. If you've noticed, we've had a lot of pioneers from the domain industry, and the reason is simple. You want to learn and pay respect to those who came before you. I mean, domain names have a 25, 30-year history, and there's a lot of lessons in those history, a lot of learnings. I mean, our goal in bringing these pioneers is so we can leapfrog ahead of others who don't take the time to dive deep into the past and see what lessons can be learned. Because a lot of the things we're trying to do, the original domainers did and had to figure out, but without any precedent. At least we have some sort of a idea, roadmap, whatever you want to call it, of what to look for. So I think it will be really exciting to hear what Andrew has to say. And adding one more thing, like I always find it so interesting when you have a guest who is super early in a new industry, right? Like the people who got into Bitcoin when it was like less than $100. Like, what did they see? What was their insight that billionaires, hedge fund managers, major banks, investment firms all missed, right? Like those guys bought in when it was in the tens of thousands. But, whenever you're early in an industry, I think it's a unique dynamic. And, Andrew's been super early in domain. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Absolutely. I feel the same way. I agree. It's fascinating to me to meet people like Andrew, and we have Michael Seiger in the crowd. It was such a great space. If you haven't listened to that episode, guys, it's on our iTunes and Spotify. Andrew, I sent you a request to speak, and I understand you said you might need a couple of minutes, and so we'll be here waiting for you. And then meanwhile, let me introduce ENS Academy for in case we have newcomers here. ENS Academy's mission is to accelerate the adoption of ENS worldwide. We bring ENS experts and entrepreneurs to share their knowledge with the global community. Our goal is to educate, support, and empower anyone who can benefit from this technology. Uh, we believe ENS to be an open public utility that belongs to the community. ENS aims to be the place where we can all, ENS Academy aims to be the place where we can all learn the fundamentals, skills, and the possibilities of ENS. And with that, we'll just wait a couple of minutes for Andrew to join the speaker panel.
Yeah, and just one more thing to add in the meantime is if you get a chance, take a look at the episodes we've uploaded to iTunes and Spotify. There's a wealth of really valuable information in there. We've brought on board a spectrum of categories of expertise, from decentralized websites to numerics to domain names and so forth. So it's a really nice collection of content we're building up there.
Yes, yes, that's going to be growing every time we have more spaces like this. We are going to upload them to our podcast. Andrew, welcome. Andrew, you're on mute if you're trying to speak.
Yep, sorry. There we go. We good?
Yes, yes, I can hear you.
Sorry,
Hi, how are you?
I'm trying to sign in from my MacBook, and I'm having an impossible time pulling up the screen. So I just came in from my phone. For
Yeah,
some reason I can't.
I think Twitter doesn't have that feature where to speak on a
Yeah,
space. You can listen only,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. That's where we're at. So we'll just go about a phone, and we're okay that way. You can hear me, right?
Yes, it's perfect.
Excellent, excellent. Sorry about that.
So
A little bit
so
of technical
no.
difficulties, but now I didn't know you couldn't come from your computer. So now we live and learn, right?
Yes,
Um,
I learned that way too. I learned the hard way. But thank you, Andrew, for joining us today. We're so excited to meet you. I watched a few YouTube videos where you were interviewed, and I learned so much. I knew this is going to be a great episode. And with that, I'm gonna hand it over to James. He has some questions to start with.
Excellent.
Yeah, let's jump right in. So I always find it super interesting to know how someone got in very early, right? Like I want to talk to the guys who bought Bitcoin $30, not the guys like Elon who bought it at like around 30,000, right? What what did you see early in the domain industry? Because my research says you were in there like in the early like mid 90s or so, where it was basically the beginning of it. How did you get in that early, and like what was the light bulb moment, and what were those early days like?
So I view it as I got in a little too late, right? Because I had to, if I got in early enough, I would have registered. It's kind of like similar to like Board Ape Yacht Club, where I got in August of 21, and I had the opportunity to mint. I clearly was shown the Board Ape Yacht Club at minting and just decided to pass. Well, I kind of had an opportunity to register domains before hand register some of the best domains, and I missed that window. So I came in just a little bit after that, right? So like still in time, I'd say like 97, early 98. So there was still enough time to hand register plenty of great .coms, but not the one words, right? I missed that by like a year, but because I was so early, I got to know everybody who was smart enough to hand register them, or maybe they were too early, right? I mean, a lot of those guys sold too early too. So, as anything else, you don't really, you tend to be an early seller when you are an early buyer. So, I got into it kind of in a unique way. I left Wall Street. I worked on Wall Street for Michael Milken and Drexel and Bear, and decided I had the entrepreneurial bug and just had to be an entrepreneur. And I I co-founded a television production company where we created pretty unique programming at the time. We kind of branded our own form of television programming that we called REP, or Revenue Enhanced Programming. And what that did was combine really traditional, awesome entertainment with third-party sponsors and advertisers and e-commerce. But in that case, it was 1-800 number, direct telephone e-commerce. And then instead of buying the airtime, we were able to secure airtime in partnership with networks, because our broadcast partners, the people we created shows for, were really, really entertaining properties. So we created 2 primetime shows with the Grateful Dead, Diana Ross, Itzhak Perlman, the violinist for PBS, multiple NFL teams, PGA, NASCAR. So we were creating these shows that combined sponsorship, entertainment and product with these really awesome brands. So most people had to buy that airtime. We didn't. They actually paid us to air the shows, even though we sold things. The networks, all the major networks. We were pretty much on every major network at some point. Now, back then, Fox was still cable, just to put things in perspective, right? I mean, it was really early. And one of the things that happened during that was in '98, we were in bed pretty deeply with the Grateful Dead, and we were in bed with the New England Patriots, and both very dear to my heart to this day. And amazingly, the Grateful Dead were making money selling T-shirts on the intranet, which was the pre-internet e-commerce day, to direct to consumers, as well as through 800 number. But they were selling directly on the intranet because a lot of their customers were really technologically advanced. And the New England Patriots, an NFL team, they also kind of had a website with a little bit of interactivity as early as '98. And to put that in perspective, Amazon was just getting going, and the Gap, take a big store like the Gap, had not even built a website yet, and Google didn't come around until 2001, basically publicly. So we were like, all right, this internet thing is going to be really awesome, and we got to be here. I mean, we can't raise like $4 billion to buy our own television network, and we need an outlet for our shows and our programming, and let's go. It's going to be so much better and cheaper. We can have our own network on this internet. But then we were like, well, how are we going to get an audience, right? It's one thing to have a network and distribution. There's another thing if nobody watches. So we were like, all right. And back then there was no Google, right? It was AOL broadband. It was AOL and Yahoo search. I think, I saw Mike was on here. I think he was around, right? For sure. And we made a decision, just had a hunch. We're like, everybody got to a website by direct navigation, right? So we're like, what's the best, most visited domain names? That's how people get there, right? They go in their browser, they type in a domain.com and find their way. And we like, what's the best category? Where do we go? And we decided to take a very simple approach. Who advertises the most in the Super Bowl? And the answer was beer companies. So we saw beer.com was operated by a couple juniors at University of Colorado who had a website up, actually, a very early visionary social network of their friends puking, their friends who had the biggest beer gut competition, and a big banner that said, we need sponsors so we can buy more beer. And we called these guys up and we said, we want to buy this. And long story short, they didn't want to sell it, but we bought 80% of the domain and formed a company, gave them 20%, bought 80% for, under six figures in cash plus 20%. And we brought a partner, friends of ours here who were very, very deep in bed with Miller at the time, who was independent from Coors. They were still just Miller Brewing Company out of Wisconsin. And we went back and forth to, Wisconsin for meetings with Miller and, to try to conquer the world of the internet and beer. And we thought we were going to be able to. And in that process, one day out of nowhere, we got a phone call from McKinsey and Company consultants, right? And they said, hey, we represent Interbrew, which now is part of Budweiser and InBev, but at the time was independent. They own Stella Artois, Labatt, Bass Ale, amongst other companies, other brands. And they're like, we want to talk to you about your domain name. Can you come to Toronto tomorrow? And we're like, sure. They're like, well, we'll pay your flight, whatever. So we go to Toronto, we get there, we sit across the desk from this really young CMO and the McKinsey guy, and they're like, we don't want to do anything with you guys after being, exchanging niceties, but we want this domain name. And they handed us a check for $2 million and across the table and said, what do you think? And we said, can we step outside and take a break and talk about it? And we stepped outside, we came back in and said, we're not really interested. We're partnering with Miller. we have all these kinds of plans. We have our partners here have a deep relationship with Miller, business relationship. They're a vendor, and whatever. We went home, and before we even landed, there was a voicemail to call them back, and they said, "We really need this domain name. What would it take?" And we said $10 million, and they said, "Let us call you back." And they called us back 20 minutes later and said, "How about 7.2?" And we said, "Okay." And that was the end of our plans that would have blown up in terrible smoke to build anything on beer.com. A disaster. And we sold it, and we're like, "This is pretty good. Let's do more." And proceeded to buy domains for the next 23 years, right? So buy, sell, advise, right up till today. So that's kind of how we got there.
Andrew, how did they determine the valuation on that? How is it they were so confident in being able to pay that kind of money?
Um, we can come back to a bigger picture valuation discussion. It's been a very hot topic this weekend on Twitter with me. But in that case, they actually, it was a pretty amazing story. So they had this CMO who was like a young guy, 38, 39 years old. And they had a plan with McKinsey that was 15 years in length. It was amazing. They actually had a plan to shift 1% of the beer market using the internet over 15 years to their brands. Not the, nothing, long term, really brilliant. It was basically, a it was really visionary of what was to come with social networks and things like that. After we sold it to them, 1% of the beer market's a big number, right? Big number. So at the time and now. So once we sold it to them, this guy Rocco, the CMO, developed pancreatic cancer and sadly passed away in like 9 months. And over the next 2 years. And when that happened, they were like a ship lost at sea, right? The big, massive conglomerate corporation and with no champion and no leader. And, they ultimately ended up selling the domain name for more than they paid for it, actually, to a Canadian kind of soft porn company at the time, which was big still back then, right? And then, the domain is, still around and in the hands of my very dear friend here, and something I'm actually working with him on behind the scenes again. So I think that to them it was what we were willing to sell it for, and they had a very, very specific plan for it. Right? They called us knowing they needed it for their plan. Didn't work out for whatever. It may have worked out or may have not worked out if Rocco had not passed away, but it didn't work out. So sometimes that happens, right?
When you think back to the early days of the industry, you mentioned that you knew a lot of the early players in the space. How would you describe those people, or what advantages did they have that allowed them to see the opportunity and succeed? Like, did they have a lot of money that they could take a risk on? Was it they were just more intuitive about the market opportunity, or they had some sort of background that kind of helped?
Well, the first wave of registrations was free, right? So, I mean, there were people who registered singleword.coms for nothing at the time initially. And then it was what, $4 a year or whatever it was back then. So, through registrars. So, I think there were two different groups of people, right? There were the pioneers of the domain name industry, people like Bob Parsons, who started GoDaddy, and Mike Mann at Buy Domains, and people like myself building, buying and developing and flipping domains, and Rick Schwartz, obviously, and bunch of others. Guys, you guys are probably kind of moved on, but guys like Frank Schilling and Kevin Ham, and very, very. These guys were pioneers. We were pioneers, I guess, in the domain industry. And then there were people just who registered domains. Maybe they registered 10, maybe they registered 100, maybe they were a CEO of a big company and they registered GE for GE or GM for GM, or maybe they were just people who were technologically savvy and early, and happened to grab a few domain names. I mean, there was one of my early friends was who I sold a couple massive 7-figure domains for, was at the time he was an 18-year-old, 17-year-old high school student when he registered some of those domains. So I think it was a mix of everybody, just like today, right? I mean, if you look at NFTs, which are early, You know, I mean, I can really speak best to Bored Ape Yacht Club as because I'm a member, but you know, there are CEOs and there are celebrities and there are, you know, 17-year-olds who bought 20 apes or 20-year-olds who bought 20 apes, right? And admin for nothing, for, you know, for a few $100 each, and they're worth millions. So, I very similar parallel.
And just continuing with that thread, so um, when you look at the early days of the market, like who were the buyers? Was it primarily companies? Because if we look at ENS right now, when you see big sales, it's pretty much other people in the community. It's not the companies that are paying these big amounts. How is it with DNS?
I don't think it's changed. I mean, honestly, like I don't think anything has changed too much, right? There were early adapt. I'll tell you how it has changed in a minute. But there were companies. I mean, Interbrew was a big company, right? We sold Diamond.com next to a big company, you know, the second largest diamond site holder in the world. And there were emerging companies and VC-backed companies and startups, right? And there were investors who were taking risks. Prices, you know, there were still 6, 7, 8-figure deals, right? I don't, you know, the only thing that's really changed from then to today is there's more uh, understanding and mainstream adoption of you know, that we need this, that we should have this, but we're still not there, right? I mean, we're still not at that point where every major corporation thinks it needs to own their category or exact match domain name. You know, there may be one company that says we're going to pay 8 figures for ours, and another company that should own it that says we wouldn't pay $10. And so a lot is still the same. You know, and I'm shout out to people like Michael Seiger and his program, right? I mean, you know, the more sales that happen, the more education, the more winners, the more companies that do it and succeed with a big brand on their exact match or category domain, the more it highlights it and educates. But we're still not at mainstream understanding. It's still, you know, an art, not a science, to sell a high level domain name. And I don't, you know, so, you know, I think ENS, that's .com. ENS is, you know, even earlier, right? I mean, you know, ENS is, so I've been one of the most outspoken people for 20 plus years on ancillary TLDs. And I don't, meaning I've never deviated that TLDs are an incredible moneymaker for the people who own them to sell them, meaning the donuts and the companies that have that extension and can sell it to the public for $9.99 or $19.99 or whatever the price is. But ultimately, they're worthless to the end user. At the best case, they're an on ramp, as Drew Rosner likes to say. They're an on ramp until you can afford your .com and upgrade and grow up. So I'm not changing that stance. Today it's .io is fading a little bit and XYZ is hot. And back in the day it was .co and .tv. And but you know, as I tell everybody, if you take 1 week, and I'm going to come into ENS in this a little bit. If you take 1 week and you watch primetime television, watch NFL basketball games, watch American Idol, watch the most popular shows on, you know, on network and cable television, drive on the highway and look at billboards, take a train and look at the advertising, read magazines like People and, you know, Time and Cosmopolitan and whatever else are big these days. And at the end of the, and every day, everything you do, write down how many .coms you see advertised versus anything else. And the answer is you'll see hundreds of millions of dollars of .coms in that 7-day window of testing. You might see a few .edus and a few .orgs and nothing else. So there's hundreds of millions a week spent on .com to this day, and that's been going on for 20 years. So .com is, as I always say, nothing I would like more than to own a .com and have someone beat a dot something else and spend $100 million advertising it, because I'm going to get so much of that traffic and business that I'm just going to win and pick up their seconds. ENS is a little different. Obviously, I'm very into Web3 and very into crypto and investing in it from a year and a half, 2 years ago. Um, I think it's the most legitimate opportunity yet because it has utility. It has utility different than any of the old TLDs besides .com, right? It actually has a specific utility that ties a URL to a wallet, to the metaverse, to Web3, to NFTs, and then allows that to also connect and tie it to the .com instead of competing with it, right? So um, I'm cautiously optimistic about where .eth goes, and I'm pretty optimistic that you saw Budweiser with the beer .eth. Like you're going to see, um, I think you're going to see more companies want to have both complementary, the .com and the .eth. And I'm not giving out investment advice, okay? Because it isn't .com. Someone else could come along. .com, someone could figure out how to adapt .com in a minute to the wallet, and then it's over, in my opinion, if it happens soon. There's a lot of things that could go wrong. It doesn't have that 20 plus years of ingrained, you know, .com is part of the brand. It's part of the utility. But I do think there's certainly more. I'm more, again, it's speculative, but it isn't a dead end or a TLD du jour like all the other ones. And I'm definitely paying attention. I haven't done much yet. I mean, a little bit, but I mean, I'm definitely paying attention.
Oh, one of the areas that we cover on ENS Academy is valuation, because it's very easy to spend money, but spending it well is a different dynamic, right? It's like that saying, measure twice, cut once. Can you talk about valuations? I mean, you've been at the center of a lot of big deals. What makes for a 7, 8 figure domain? Like, how do you view valuation, and how has valuation changed over time?
It hasn't changed much, amazingly. It really has not changed much, um, which is unbelievable. And, I've had kind of two Twitter debates in the last week. One was with my friend Mike here, and, that, some of the appraisals out there are just nothing but hurt the value of domains. They do nothing to add value, and they're not going to get there the way they're doing them. I'm actually working with Hilco Digital Assets, who I've now partnered with, on a handwritten report, almost like a legal letter of opinion, um, appraisal process done by a committee. But leaving that aside, appraisals have been weak. And the other debate is, this whole topic of people get upset that the big sales aren't reported. And I got into a back and forth, if anyone saw it this weekend on Twitter, with some people about this, because people want to see more reporting, and I'm never reporting. My deals are never going to be reported. Buy, sell, investments. I don't want them to be. I don't want people to know what I paid or what I sold for. I have no ego in this. Okay. My clients, when I'm buying or selling a domain for an outside party, that is the last thing they want. And I'm going to protect them unless, they're a public company and someone can dig later and figure it out. And I'm never going to convince them to report it. There's no upside for them to report it. Zero. Okay. And I don't think if they did, it helps other. I don't need outside appraisals or outside comps that are reported to sell a domain or buy a domain. And I think that since only and I love Ron Jackson, and is one of the oldest. Again, going back to the Ron Jackson's one of the first people I met in this industry, and along with Rick and a few other people, and one of the best people out there in the world, never mind this industry. And I love DN Journal, everything about it. But I've always made a statement, like even the reported sales in there hurt. They don't help because they're such a small percentage. When somebody is negotiating to buy a domain and they see the biggest sale of the last 2 years was 1.3 or $3 million, well, it's just not true. So I have to spend time unraveling that conversation and educating them. And just like most mergers and acquisitions, corporate M&A, right? Unless it's a public company, how many times do you read somebody bought a company and it, price is not disclosed? It's almost never disclosed in a private purchase and sale of a corporation. Even massive private mergers, private equity deals aren't reported. So behind the scenes. So that's just the way it is. So, I think it always comes down to um, what is the buyer, what's it worth to the buyer? And I posted something about this weekend, right? Domains are magical because a domain may be worth $100 to buyer company A and 100 million to company B, right? And so company A is not going to pay enough, and company B, and I'm assuming, they don't, I'm not saying after the fact, before the fact, and company B may be like, wow, we know this is worth X to us. It might be worth 300 million to our ultimate enterprise value. So it's an asset. It's not a profit and loss or a P&L expense. So yeah, we can pay 5 million for it because it's an asset on our balance sheet. And that's the other thing. I always joke, if you buy 2 Super Bowl commercials in 2023, this coming year, okay, that is going to cost you over $12 million before production. Okay. So call it 15 million if you're lucky. Okay. And it lasts for 30 seconds twice, a couple days before PR, a couple days after. It's a 5-day window, and you either have that return on investment or you write it off. Okay. It isn't an asset you can put on the balance sheet and resell or get lifelong utility from. And it's always been staggering to me. And if you're going to buy a Super Bowl commercial for $15 million, God, you better have a great domain name to go with it, right? If you're going to spend that money, spend the extra $5 million and put the domain on the screen. So valuation is really in the eyes of the champion of the buyer, right? People think they can convince somebody to buy a domain name and sorry, I'm a huge believer in educating, but I also think there's over-educating. You can't educate, the CEO or the CMO of a 10,000 person multi-billion dollar company to buy a category domain name because if they don't know why they need it or what to do with it, what happens? They buy it, they put it on the shelf, nothing comes of it, and you see it come back on the market, always. But if they do know what to do with it, if they have an internal champion, let's say let me give you an example. I can't say the domain, but I had a conversation this morning with a new CMO and the COO of a New York Stock Exchange, very large, very profitable company. And they have a crappy name, and they wanted to buy an exact match of their crappy name, and it's unavailable. It's owned by a massive corporation. And the domain I brought them is an incredible domain. It's a category domain. It's an exact match brand domain. And I think they're going to move forward with it. But I didn't have to tell them. They already had this decision to rebrand because they can't get their other exact match. They already have champions internally. Now it just comes down to a negotiation, right? Negotiation is where the education has to occur. No, it's not the top 3 sales on DN Journal or what Sedo or GoDaddy just appraised it at. That's not reality. Here is why it's actually 8 million and not 1 million. And if you want it, that's what it's going to take. And, then you negotiate, right? So does that make sense? That was a long-winded answer. Sorry about that.
It does. And would you also say that sometimes length doesn't matter for valuation? Like, companies are willing to pay even for longer domains, or what are your thoughts?
I mean, sure. I mean, obviously, if I'm Alphabet, I'd rather own alphabet.com than, ALP, right? I mean, or AL probably. Although that one's a debate, obviously. But, again, I think it comes down to the brand, the category, the situation. But, obviously 2-letter.coms and 1-letter.coms are incredibly rare assets. But I think, you have they're rare. They're rare. They're standalone, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're better for the right buyer.
Well, let's transition to digital assets. So, you from my research, like, you have a lot of expertise in various forms of digital assets. If we take a step back at what's happening in the world, do you see like a major shift that people are not recognizing from traditional assets, stocks, bonds, real estate, gold, to digital assets, which includes, of course, domain names and NFTs?
So I just formed a new venture that I'm June 1st that I'm so excited with called Hilco Digital Assets with Hilco Global, who is a worldwide asset leader and investor across all non-digital, real traditional asset classes, and now moving into digital together. Um, Look, I think there's room for everything, right? I mean, I own stocks. You got to be diversified. I wouldn't just be in one asset class ever. As far as I make my living, in digital assets, and that started with domain names, and has expanded into, I guess, NFTs. Look, I consider myself. I could do domain names in my sleep, right? Literally in my sleep. I've been doing this a long friggin' time, man. Um, you know, NFTs, I kind of feel like I'm in a fast track, and I'm probably farther along than most of the general world, but still a lot to learn. We're only a year. I'm only a couple of years, not even in, and big difference. It's moving faster, and I feel like I'm more educated on NFTs at the 2 year mark than I was on domains at the 2 year mark, because the whole thing is moving faster. But look, I think digital assets are absolutely here to stay, all forms, right? Including music royalties and other aspects of that are being put into digital format now. Other asset classes, but I mean, I think physical assets and digital assets are here to stay, and I think they're going to see in many cases a hybrid, right? So you're seeing it a lot. Something like NBA Top Shot. I mean, trading cards, paper cardboard trading cards in sports are still incredibly valuable and have resurged. And so have digital assets in that space. And I think you'll see them come together. You're seeing it a little bit in art, right? And but yeah, there is no doubt in my mind that we are. I saw Ben Mezarek, who is someone I follow very closely. He, incredibly smart guy, and wrote the great novel, Bringing Down the House, and true story of his MIT blackjack team. He recently sent out a tweet that I gave to my 21-year-old son, right? I sent to him. And he said, if you're in your 20s and you're not doing, if you're in your 20s, you should be doing nothing but paying attention and learning about NFTs, because it's going to be a multi-trillion-dollar market in 10 years. And I concur with that completely. And I think domains are always going to be, I think there's more ceiling in NFTs than domains, because domains are more mature, right? Like, period. That's it. They're not going anywhere, but they're more mature. So, there's more room for disaster and for massive upside and wealth in other digital asset classes like NFTs, because domains are now more mature.
Well, it's really exciting that .eth domains are NFTs, that they compromise the category of NFTs. If you
I
look
agree.
at when you look at NFTs, uh, like when I saw a recent interview that you did, you mentioned that you like the 20 years, the 25 years in domains you've been in, like it feels like that's what it's been like in NFTs. Like, can you give us a big picture overview of why this is such a big deal? Like, you know, in my mind, like they're like I've never seen growth like this. Like everywhere I look, NFTs, sports teams, Hollywood directors, actors, athletes. Like, what's going on?
Well, let me back up, because I want to address one more point you made a minute ago first. Um, the fact that ENS domains are an NFT is intriguing. I mean, I transferred my own personal name, ENS wallet, yesterday, and it's like, wow, that was cool. It's like transferring an NFT. Doesn't mean .coms can't get attached to NFTs at some point. Doesn't mean that someone icon or one of the doesn't decide to do the same thing and become competitive. That's my concern about ENS, right? I mean, Netscape was the first search engine, and none of you guys have heard of it in your 20s and 30s, right? So I will say that, I think, GoDaddy recently made this acquisition of my good friend Reza, this company Dan.com, which I was trying to get Hilco to buy before, and even before GoDaddy finished off, and I think there's a lot of hidden potential in what Dan could do or might do in this space, and I think that we'll see if GoDaddy can milk that cow. But I think it's pretty amazing that yes, domains are now being ownership of domains is being reflected in a non-fungible token format. But again, who knows if it's going to be ENS or somebody else is just going to come in and overtake that. That would be my concern on the risk. It's not. No, if anyone thinks they can't, they're naive and they haven't been around long enough. Doesn't mean they will, but they could. And I hope .com does, right? But leaving that aside, to answer your other question, I mean, look, obviously, sports teams, celebrities, entertainment brands, of course, they're going to be the early adapters. Just like I said, what did I say at the beginning of this interview or show, right? I learned about the internet from the Grateful Dead and New England Patriots in the 90s, right? So they're always the early adapters. But I view NFTs. I'm an investor in Bored Ape Yacht Club. I love my ape. I believe in that. I believe that is the Amazon of NFTs, and that's not going to change. Or the Disney potentially of NFTs. I always say Walt Disney's famous quote was, "It all started with a mouse, Mickey Mouse." And I kind of view NFTs all starting with an ape. And I think Yuga Labs is going to be a prominent player for the long haul. And I'm really happy to be a part of that ride from early on. However, NFTs to me are infrastructure. An NFT is a web, like the websites in the 90s, e-commerce in the 2000s. It's core infrastructure. Every company in the world is going to need to use NFTs as a means of doing business at some level. Just like they have a website. Every company in the world has a website. And some companies are going to reinvent the wheel and change their industry and disrupt their industry and do crazy, massive things using NFT technology. And some companies are probably just going to go through the motions, right? I could see a restaurant moving their loyalty card or their loyalty program to an NFT in a digital format, and that's it. It's just the same old thing. It's just on an NFT instead of on a physical credit card looking thing. But other companies are going to reinvent it, and there's so much room to grow and so many things you can do. That world is kind of your imagination. And they're going to look, I think a lot, I've said this before, I think 99.9% of the early multi-hundreds of thousands of NFT mints, the profile picture NFTs, the animals in the zoo, right? I think 99% of those are going to go gonzo to zero, completely wiped out as if they never happened. And there'll be a handful that might go through and have gone through a little bit of a pullback in the market, but will come out and be the Amazons and the eBays and Googles, right? And I think Bored Apes is one of them, and the fact they bought CryptoPunks even strengthens that. I think you'll see more. I'm not exactly sure yet who those others are. I can say this: I can't list anybody, who I'm 100% as confident about as I am Yuga Labs. I would say Artifact with Nike buying them, but they stumbled pretty bad in the last few days, and we'll see how they recover from it. It may not be. It may be one that isn't here yet. It may be one that already hasn't taken off yet, but there's something there that we don't see. So it'll be interesting to see where it goes. But those are just early projects, early companies, early leaders. NFTs are infrastructure. That's what they are.
Yeah, I totally agree. And, in my mind, I think NFTs are what's going to bring mass adoption to crypto and blockchain. I think the average person has a hard time understanding DeFi. Um, Crypto gaming is still in the very early stages. So basically, like, if I had to pick, like, where will billions of users come in the future into crypto, it would be from NFTs because everybody immediately understands it. It's digital ownership, and spans across industries. Um, my follow-up question would be is, how did you get into NFTs early? Like, you were one of the early people into the Bored Ape Yacht Club. What did you see that other people missed at the time?
Well, I would say I didn't see it because I was shown it by a very good friend during the week of minting, and I literally blew it off, like hardcore blew it off. And I was already into NFTs a little bit. I was into Top Shot, you know. I was like literally like didn't even pay attention. I was like, yeah, whatever. And my friend was like, you really should look at this. And I'm like, yeah, whatever. And I mean, I've written about this for Decrypt on June 3rd. So they minted what in April? On June 3rd, I was sitting on a balcony in a hotel on an island celebrating my wife's 50th birthday with my son at like 12:30 a.m. and I was about to mint an ape at 1.5 ETH. And I had my finger on ready to go, just boom. All I had to do is press the last button and I wimped out. And fast forward about June 27th, 3-4 weeks later, at 4.5 ETH, the exact same thing. I was sitting somewhere noticeably ready to hit the button and said, I'm doing it this time. And I, for some reason, swiped up and closed my phone. On August 12th, I was heading to play golf with my dad and my son. And when we pulled in a parking lot, I said, I got to do it now. And I put a bid in at 16 ETH on an ask price of 20 ETH for an ape that I liked, that I had done a lot of homework on, got a lot of help from a few friends who were early, Morgan Linton and others here in Patel, and friends of mine who were domainers. And when I got off the golf course, I owned that ape at what I bid for. And, at that point, I had to have it. I think for a couple of reasons. I did think it was the future of NFTs. I did think at that point it was going to be the blue chip. I had FOMO. I'm going to be fully transparent. I had FOMO, big time. I kind of felt like I had to have it, and I bought it. And then, I was very outspoken for a long time that I would never sell it, and I sold it on Saturday night at like May 2nd at 1 in the morning. I put it up for sale after I claimed my, for those who understand this, my other side deeds. At that point, I was already up significantly because I got airdropped a free M2 serum, which I sold in the market instead of mutating my ape. And so I was already up significantly on my initial investment. And I had already collected my ape coin, and now I was up from that, and now I grabbed my other deeds and minted two and got my free one. And as soon as that happened, I sold at the absolute all-time high to this day. And that was just, I threw it up there and woke up Sunday morning and it was gone. And I was like, I like felt sad and empty. And took me like 3 days to get over it, but then things started to correct and the market started to collapse. And I'm like, oh, that was a good move. I bought back an ape, a great ape, a merch ape, in partnership with Hilco Digital Assets together about a month ago at about 60% of what I sold for. And, very, very excited to be back aboard for the long haul.
Well, I think that story is really great to highlight the importance of having a social capital, right? Like having a great network that can bring up opportunities as they arise, and that's something we also kind of talk about in ENS Academy is the value of social capital. My last question before handing it over to my co-host and opening it up to questions is corporations, right? So Will they use both their .com address and .eth address to receive crypto payments, or do you think they will have a preference for one or the other?
I think there's a lot to be worked out. So in my book, the jury is out. I mean, look, we have to get through we need a better solution to the immense amounts of fraud going on, right, in the space of in the crypto NFT, transaction space, the phishing, the scams, like anything early, you know, early brings all kinds of people, right? Historically, right? And even in the gold rush, there were good and bad guys, right? And there's a lot of nastiness, as we know, going on right now from a fraudulent, standpoint. And I think until that is really under control, until the major players figure it out, because nobody's immune. OpenSea, Coinbase. I mean, then you throw in, all the crazy bankruptcies and problems that have occurred in the last month of crypto, where what are considered, were considered the Bank of Americas of the future are gone and collapsed, and people lost trillions. Until that's figured out, I don't think there is going to be an answer of what the utility of a .eth name or a .com name or an NFT as a wallet is, because I can transfer in and out of a hot wallet, a cold wallet, or a ledger, a Trezor, a .eth name, public wallet address with 1,000,000 characters. At the end of the day, they're all still vulnerable. Ledger less so, but they're all still vulnerable. And until that's resolved, I think it's early to make that call. I don't begin to know the answer to that, honestly, yet.
No, great points, and we actually had a great episode on ENS and security, which is a really good one to go over. But
Yeah, and again, I'm just being really careful. I don't know enough about it.
Well, with that, I'll hand it over to my co-host.
James, your mic is blocked.
With that,
I cannot hear that question. I hear a vague voice in the background.
can you guys hear me?
Yeah, now we can hear you.
Okay. I was saying I'll just hand it over to my co-host and let's open it up to questions.
Thank you, James. I joined from my friend's phone because something's wrong with my ENS Academy account. I can't hear anything. But yeah, thank you, Andrew. This was such an amazing, insightful episode. I learned so much, and your experience is really valuable for the community. I really appreciate you, and I'm definitely listening to this one again, and would love to have you on again to discuss ENS in more detail, right? Because as you know, ENS has so much utility, and it's not just a domain name for a company. And so, like, for example, the identity layer that it's creating is going to be something huge, and I think that gives it more of an edge. As long as being able to sign in with Ethereum, log in with your username. So we would love to talk about all that with you. And for now, I went ahead and uh, pulled up some of the audience questions. We have Magnum.eth. Go ahead.
Hi, guys. Thank you for this space. And Andrew, thank you very much for coming. I would like to ask a brief question about Web 2 versus Web 3, because obviously we have GoDaddy in Web 2, but in Web 3, we still don't have that. Do you think you can fill that blank with Hilco, perhaps? And I just wanted to touch on something you said as well. You mentioned that NFTs are infrastructure. I do agree with that, and definitely .eth is infrastructure. Don't you think that the only way GoDaddy comes and competes would be to create their own blockchain, which good luck with that? Or would they need to come on to Ethereum, and that will be transparent and a little bit out of their hands as well? Thank you.
I'm not going to pretend this, hypothecate or speak too much for GoDaddy. I mean, I don't, what I will say is, you know, I have heard from friends there who are high up, and it just seems to be so far the game plan. They appear to be very, very, very narrowly focused on domains and becoming, the end all be all domain company, and certainly doing a great job getting there. Um, you know, as far as where they will expand beyond domains via acquisition or organically, um, I really have no sense of that. I couldn't begin to answer. It's a better question. I mean, that's a better question for, a guest from GoDaddy. I certainly think they have the ability to make that move. As far as Hilco goes, I can speak to that. We formed this company, Hilco Digital Assets, to take advantage of Web3 and domains. So we are actively going to be finding ways to service and our customers and our partners and our clients and invest in domains and NFTs and blockchain and Web3 and derivative of that, anything that really touches the digital asset space that allows us to grow our company. Hold on, guys.
Thank you.
Oh, there. Okay. Sorry.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Magnum. I think that was very interesting, and that GoDaddy is doing great. And we had an episode, Michael Seiger. So if you're interested, you can go listen to it on our podcast. And for our last question, because we're at time, we have Erazur. Go ahead, Erazur.
Hey, how are you guys doing? I'm really glad that you guys let me on. So, I had a question. So, overall, what I've been noticing is this is something that I'm coming from my personal experience, but I really want to understand. We are building assets, right? But in the end, everything is coming down to the grind that we do. Everything is coming down to finding that right thing, and then we want to flip it. Isn't that creating a misleading hype? Do you think that way? And from the engineering perspective, I want to understand how do you think that going forward we'll be able to solve this problem? Because what I see is a scenario where everyone is trying to whitelist themselves out. Everyone is trying to get a good ENS. Everyone is trying to get all the digital assets that are hyped around. But in the end, very less people get into it, and then they are depressed. So I know this does not go along with all of the things that we want to look at, but yeah, this is something that I wanted to understand how you look at this.
Not totally. Some of that went in and out, so I didn't totally grab that. Apologize. I didn't totally. Could someone summarize that for me?
Yeah. So I think I was asking two questions altogether. So there are two questions. The first one is from the engineer end. How do we create an ecosystem where we know that people are not going to get depressed after they miss out on whitelist? On the engineering side, how do we fix this? How do we create contracts that help these people mint? How do we help those people who don't get anything get something? You get it? Like even if you're like trying for an ENS, you know that there are four other guys who are trying to get it, and you're competing all the way. And that competition, when you don't get anything, you end up sleeping depressed, right? So how do we look into it? Is there a point where you had to think about it or you thought about it? I'm just trying to understand what do you think?
I mean, capitalism, man. Survival of the fittest. I mean, it's business. It's competition. I mean, I don't really know how else to, answer that, but you know, um, you got to work hard. You got to scrap. You got to be opportunistic. You got to. I mean, some of the people I know who've done the best in both NFT and in domains, you know, there are people who I know one person. I'm not going to name them, but they made, they cashed out for well over $250 million in liquidity in domain space. And I can tell you for years, I don't think they slept. They built programs. They were picking up drops. They were, going through lists of thousands of names by hand to cherry pick the best ones and buying them. And they did it at 4 a.m. before everybody else got up and saw them. And so, and there's a reason they won, right? I mean, not everybody wants to make that sacrifice, and not everybody should. My family means everything to me. I spend a ton of time. I coach my kids, or did. They're grown up now, and but I did both. But I don't. I mean, I don't know. I don't. Capitalism is capitalism, man. I don't know.
I get it. I understand that. It totally makes sense.
Work hard, work hard, and make your own luck.
Yeah, I hear you, Andrew. I hear you loud and clear.
Or don't work hard and make your own luck. Some people get lucky without working hard. I don't know. I mean, but look. I mean, my friend sold Facebook.com to Facebook. He ultimately made a ton of money in options. Okay. I mean, he had no foresight, right? He registered it for a completely different reason before Facebook was ever in business or formed. And he got very, so you can get lucky too, right? I mean, it can go all different kinds of ways. But you get, as the cliche goes, you got to be in it to win it.
Yep. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Azur. Thank you, Andrew. That was very good advice. We just gotta work hard, and this is why at ENS Academy, we want to create a platform that's going to bring the best advice, the best information, the fundamentals. So it's about education for us, and we believe if you're educated, you'll make educated decisions. So again, thank you, Andrew, for joining us today. We're very happy that you gave us your time. We look forward to more interviews with you.
Happy to do it again, guys.
Thank you. Have a good day. And James, thank you. You had great questions today, and we will announce our upcoming space very soon. We're also working on a very cool project. We would love the support of the community. Please go ahead and follow us, retweet our spaces, and we'll see you on the next one. Have a good day.
Thanks, guys.
Goodbye.